We're going to try to figure out what the opposite and adjacent sides of right triangles are as we move toward the quadrantal angles. The quadrantal angles are 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and 360 degrees. Now, if you focus on the triangles that are in the first quadrant from 0 degrees to 90 degrees, and you start with the triangle that has the largest angle, which is this one right here, as that angle gets smaller and smaller, in other words, as that angle moves farther away from 90 degrees and closer to 0 degrees, you see that the length of the blue line, which is the opposite side of the triangle, is getting shorter and shorter. Eventually, when that angle decreases to the size where it is 0 degrees, then the length of the blue line, the length of the opposite side of the triangle, will be 0. So at 0 degrees, the length of the opposite side is 0. Now at the same time, as that angle is getting smaller and smaller, you see that the length of the green side of the triangle is getting longer and longer. And eventually, at 0 degrees, the length of the green side will be equal to the length of the hypotenuse of the right triangle. So in other words, the adjacent side of the triangle becomes equal to the hypotenuse of the triangle at 0 degrees. Now in the second quadrant, something similar is happening. So as we move past 90 degrees and the angle gets closer and closer to 180 degrees, we see that the blue line, the opposite side of the triangle, is getting shorter and shorter. And eventually at 180 degrees, the length of the blue line will be 0. So at 180 degrees, the length of the opposite side of the triangle is 0. Now at that same time, as we get closer and closer to 180 degrees, the length of the green line is increasing. It's getting longer and longer. So at 180 degrees, the length of the green line will be equal to the length of the hypotenuse of the triangle. So at 180 degrees, the length of the adjacent side of the triangle is equal to the hypotenuse. Now let's take a look at what's happening at 90 degrees, which is between 0 and 180. Now, as the angle increases from 0, again, we see that in this case, the opposite side of the triangle is getting longer and longer. And at 90 degrees, right, the length of the opposite side would actually be equal to the length of the hypotenuse. So at 90 degrees, the length of the opposite is equal to the length of the hypotenuse. At that same time, in going from 0 to 90, you can see that the length of the adjacent side of the triangle, the green line, is getting shorter and shorter. And eventually at 90 degrees, the length of the green line would be 0. So at 90 degrees, the opposite side, or rather the adjacent side, is 0. So to summarize, at 0 degrees, the opposite is 0, and the adjacent is equal to the hypotenuse. At 90 degrees, the opposite is equal to the hypotenuse, and the adjacent is 0. And at 180 degrees, the opposite is 0, and the length of the hypotenuse is equal to, or rather the length of the adjacent is equal to the opposite.